Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first part of our three-part series on co-occurring disorders. This first part is titled Understanding the Complexities of Co-Occurring Disorders in Supportive Housing. Again, this is a three-part series, and much of this first part is very much foundational in nature, providing you with a really good overview. My name is Crystal Sosha. I am one of the Senior Training and Consultation Specialists through Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. I am joined here by my colleague, Earl Leach, who will be here to support you in the chat as needed. If there's any technical concerns, feel free to let us know or reach out to Earl directly and he can support you with being able to hear, access the chat, and so on and so forth. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining us. As we are beginning, if you could do me a favor and let me know where you're joining from and perhaps your role, that would be very helpful for me, especially since we'll be seeing each other again. So it's good to get an understanding of who's here with us today. All right. So again, welcome. Today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. This is an interactive training, and we do encourage you to ask questions and participate throughout this session. The slides, as well as the link to the recording of this webinar, will be sent by email after this presentation. A couple of housekeeping items. I'm wondering if we're having some trouble using the chat, because I'm seeing everyone responding in the Q&A, but that's all right. All right, so just some housekeeping items. Your audio and video are muted, so although I can't see or hear you, I can see you responding in the chat. Again, I'm seeing responses through the Q&A. I wonder what's going on here. Chat is disabled. That's fun and exciting. Ooh, all right, crisis averted. We're off to a good start. Okay, so you should be able to use the chat now. Let us know if you can't. Thank you so much. All right, so if you are using the chat, thank you for letting me know. We'll restart that all over again. Let me know where you're joining us from and your role. That would be very helpful to us. All right, we're in business. To use the chat, press respond to everyone. So you will see in your chat box an option to respond to host and panelists or everyone. Be sure to press everyone. You can download the chats in the chat box at the end of this by pressing those three dots and saving the chat. Accessibility items that are important of note here. So subtitles are available or captions should be turned on. If you would like to use the captions and find that to be helpful, please feel free to press the three dots at the top or bottom of your Zoom bar, indicating more to show captions, and let us know if there's ever any accessibility concerns. We got through that difficulty with accessing the chat, but we're rocking and rolling. Thank you for joining us. Again, this webinar is being recorded and the presentation and recording will be shared with you thereafter. Yay, all right. Thank you for joining, thank you, thank you. Tasha, thank you for letting me know. I noticed about 15 Louis in the chat. Thank you for that. All right. So once again, as I mentioned, this is a three-part series on co-occurring disorders. So today is April 9th. So that's the first part. We know as the rates of substance use rise and continue to rise worldwide, it's so important for supportive housing staff, especially as this is what this series is geared toward, or who it's geared toward, to really understand the individual needs of individuals with co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. So part one, which we'll be going through today, is very much, like I said, foundational in nature. to provide you with a level of understanding on co-occurring disorders in the context of community settings, helping you identify risk factors, protective factors, what to notice. So that will be, again, pretty good overview for you. Before we jump into part 2 and part 3 on April 16th and 23rd, you'll be able to use this same link to join. And part 2 and 3 is very skills-based in nature. So you'll see what we'll talk about in just a moment for those two, but we'll cover cognitive behavior interventions, motivational interviewing strategies. We'll talk about social skills training, relapse prevention. I'll throw in a little bit of dialectical behavior therapy techniques, which I find to be helpful, especially with this population. So hopefully by the end of this series, you will have a pretty solid understanding and at least a few takeaways of what you can do to support individuals with co-occurring disorders. All right. So we are getting started with, again, part 1. So what we'll cover today is just defining and understanding an overview of mental health, substance use, and co-occurring disorders. We'll work to recognize the signs, symptoms, protective and risk factors of co-occurring disorders, especially in community-based settings. This can be helpful for those who also are not working directly in a person's home, but working in a community mental health center or another service at the outpatient level as well. We will discuss the impact of co-occurring disorders on wellness and the 8 dimensions of wellness and recovery, and then we'll briefly summarize some best practices. But again, this is an overview, some foundational bits and pieces of information before we get into part 2 and part 3. So I hope that you'll join me then for some more of those tangible interventions. All right, thank you for joining. Thanks for letting us know who you are. So I like to start off with a mindfulness exercise, and I used this one not too long ago. I find it helpful, especially with really any setting that I've worked in, but thinking about the people that you serve, and using mindfulness strategies to support someone in grounding or to support someone in just starting off a session. We got off to a little rocky start trying to figure out how to use the chat. So we're going to take a moment, and this mindfulness exercise is called Spot the Difference. So you will see 2 images, an image on the left and an image on the right. I realize it's a computer screen. If you're using your phone, it may be a little more difficult to see. But from the image to the left to the image on the right, we are looking for you to spot 7 differences. So if you can grab a piece of paper, a pencil, a pen, if you're working in a group, you've got more brain power, more power to you. But get a piece of paper or writing it down on your phone or email or something on your computer. Don't share anything just yet. And if we can, I'll give us just a minute and then I'll ask for us to identify some of the differences. Since we've got over 100 people here, which is pretty amazing, hopefully we can find all 7. So again, I will share this. And again, we are spotting 7 differences from the image on the left to the image on the right. All right, wrapping up. If you didn't get a chance to find all 7, that's okay. Hopefully our collective effort will support you in finding the rest of these. I'm seeing usually someone's really good at these. Melissa, no worries. I know it's much more difficult to look at a computer screen and find the differences than it is to maybe have a piece of paper in front of you, and the pressure of staring at the screen might be all the more difficult. But if you did get a chance to do this, feel free to put some answers in the chat. What are some of the differences that you found? Sydney found one. Brenda got a couple of them. All right, I'm seeing, and I have to orient myself back to this as well, even though I've done this so many times. Lots of answers. Okay, flag on the bottom right. That's right. So this one has 2 dots. This one has 1 dot. The fruit over here is a different color. So it looks like it's an orange fruit, and on the right side, it's a red fruit. Brenda said the apple, I'm sorry, the ice cream bunny. So it's pink, white, brown, pink, brown, white over here. Watermelon seeds. Yes, this one, watermelon seeds. No watermelon seeds. Someone's got their progressive lenses on and we're struggling. I know, it's hard. Watermelon, watermelon, watermelon. The angle of the shore. I've never heard that one. That's interesting. Yellow bottle. Yes. So here's this lotion bottle, has a sun on it, and over here it has a moon on it. And if you didn't get them all, have no fear, but I'm going to zoom in here. You'll see, oh, I saw Joseph with the penguin's cap. You're right. So this penguin's cap you'll see here to the right doesn't have this pink stripe on it. I wonder if anyone got this one and I may have missed it. The seashell is turned, and this is such a slight difference with kind of the tail facing to the left, with the tail facing to the right. Time for new glasses. I know it's time to go check in for that eye doctor appointment. But no, we thank you for doing this. It is very challenging. I'm hoping that you were mindful, or maybe you're like, Crystal, this was so frustrating. I could not find them all. And I'm sorry, but thank you for indulging me in this endeavor. Nonetheless, there's so many of these online. What does this mean for my brain? I didn't see any of these. Hey, that's a question I can't answer. But have no fear, we're doing our best. We really are. So thank you for that. All right, I am going to transition into our presentation here, and we'll see some feedback from the chat. Where's Waldo is a good one. I like doing Where's Waldo. That one would be hard to pinpoint, I think, on a virtual screen. And no, I was not trying to trick you. This was a real mindfulness exercise. So thank you for doing this. There's, again, so many different variations. If you just Google search, spot the difference. I find this helpful to engage the people that you're working with, even for yourself. I'm someone who likes to do like the New York Times Wordle or crossword, but this is light and fun and exciting. So hope that you can use this in the future, but I'm going to transition then. Again, this is one piece of a strategy that could be used, but really wanted us to get engaged for this first part here. We'll talk more about mindfulness in our second and third part, but let's transition into our presentation for today. And so I'm going to ask, what word or words come to mind when you hear the term co-occurring disorder? And feel free to let me know in the chat, just as you have been, because this is what we're here for. Happening at the same time. Mental health and substance use disorder issues concurrently, mental health and substance use, multiple things going on, complexity. having several disorders that work together to impact the whole person. Yes, absolutely. Anything else that comes to mind? Treating together can be mental, physical, substance use, etc. Yes. And Sydney, that's a really great point. For the sake of this presentation, what we're going to talk about when we hear co-occurring is a co-occurring mental health and a substance use disorder. Although we know co-occurring can mean a variety of disorders or conditions happening at the same time, whether it's mental health and physical health. We know that happens quite often with the individuals that we serve. There's so many comorbidities that each person faces and experiences. But for the sake of this, we will be talking about mental health and substance use. And I'm really glad to hear some of these responses because oftentimes we hear words like psychosis, psychotic, crazy, and and really stigmatizing language to think about co-occurring disorders. But I'm really hearing that we understand it really is a term to describe two things happening at the same time. And in this case, mental health and substance use. But I will nonetheless share some of the myths that come up when we think about substance use disorders or co-occurring disorders. And you'll see these all showed up at the same time, but we'll take a moment just to go through each one. And feel free to share some of your experiences or maybe with working in the field, maybe how your mindset has shifted. So when we see some of these myths, we're also going to myth bust, as we know. So the first myth is willpower is all one needs to beat a substance use disorder. And so we know that's not the case. We know that prolonged substance use really alters the way that our brain works. So willpower is completely out of the question here. This is not something that is a matter of will or a matter of choice. The second myth is using alcohol or drugs or substances as a choice, alluding really to that first one. So if someone becomes addicted to substances, it's their fault. And no one actively chooses to have a problem with substances. No one actively, consciously wakes up and says, oh, today is Tuesday, April 9th. I am deciding I'm going to have an alcohol use disorder. That's just not how it works. Any more than someone would choose to have a physical health condition. So keep that in mind. And I'm sure these are things that we know, but these are still things that are said or heard throughout the field. And we know that developing a substance use disorder really is a brain-based disease, and there's many contributing factors that we'll talk about. The third is those with substance use disorders have to hit rock bottom before they can get help. I'm sure we've all heard this term, rock bottom. What does that really mean? What do we think of when we hear rock bottom? All right, I'm seeing different but similar themes for everyone. Tasha May says, basically when they have lost all hope and have nothing else to lose, almost a loss of hope, no way out. Being in the worst phase of their life. Everyone's rock bottom is different. They can't get any lower. They've hit their lowest point. Everything you've lived for is gone. No supports left. Sydney says, brings to mind loss of everything, home, friends, family, hope. Yeah, when I think about especially the helping profession as a whole, or counseling or social work or support work that we're doing, all of this work is to some extent grief counseling. All counseling is grief counseling. All support work is really grief work because there's so many layers of loss. unnecessary trauma due to lack of intervention. They've hit a point where they want help, loss of hopelessness, breaking point. They've exhausted every known option. I see for me, rock bottom was the inability to continue to live in an addiction anymore. I was feeling suicidal all the time. Yeah. And so for some people, this is true that we reach a place into our lives where this person may have completely lost all sense of hope and all the things that we've covered. And we know that recovery can begin at any time. We know that the earlier someone can access treatment of any kind, um, the better that is for them. But the longer the substance use disorder continues, the harder it might be to treat. But at the same time, again, each person's story of recovery is different. And each person's lived experience is different. So I appreciate the kind of varying definitions in rock bottom as well. Yes, yes. You believe you have lost the most memorable, important things or people in your life have burned all your bridges. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So a couple other myths here, and again, these are not exhaustive by any means, but substance use disorders only affect certain types of people. And we know that not to be true. We know that substance use disorders, mental health conditions, all of these things do not discriminate and can affect anyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, gender identity, sexual identity, religious status, all of those things combined. And then the last being you need to treat the mental illness or mental health condition first before the substance use. So we know integration or both elements happening at the same time, co-occurring, kind of those definitions that we shared, has the best possible outcome. So do the places that you work at right now treat or address both the mental health condition and the substance use? Or are you working at a facility or maybe a substance primary location that does one before the other, or you have to do this before you do this? Hopefully that's not the case, but we know that's still true in some places. And thank you again for some of those responses in the chat. Reaching a point of utter despair, lacking any support network. Awesome. So I'm seeing some of you work at places that are connected to mental health and substance use. You can receive both at the same time, co-occurring treatment. Hopefully as well, we are based out of New Jersey, so we are not familiar with every single resource in the state of Washington, but I hope that hearing from some others in the chat that you are able to connect with each other if you need to provide a referral to the people that you serve. And that's a good point, yes. So if you're working in a supportive housing setting, you may not necessarily be providing formal, quote, treatment, but you are offering support, you're providing case management, housing support, community reintegration, improving this person's quality of life. All of those things are equally as important. And Earl makes a very good point. There is an important distinction between both services being offered separately instead of integrated. And I can go on a 60-minute tangent in that in itself, thinking about the people that we serve and the challenges that they may face if, let's say, you are a mental health primary or if you are a supportive housing agency and you need to refer out, how often and how difficult it might be to get someone into another location, to specialty care, to another service. Whereas if you are truly functioning from an integrated care model, you are more than co-located. So you're more than within the same building. You're really actively working together and collaborating to support this person. Okay. And I like what Natalie said, we meet the client where they are at. It is completely up to our clients. And that's really important. We know that person-centered and person-driven care or support is so vital. We may have a completely different agenda for this person, and we're really putting our morals and values and beliefs on the back burner while we're supporting this person. All right, so we'll briefly cover just general definitions of mental health disorder, substance use disorder, co-occurring disorder, just to get a sense of what we're really looking at here. I have a feeling, given the work that we are doing, we're very familiar with this. But this is defined by the DSM-5-TR, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And I actually have this book right next to me. It's huge, it's shiny, it's filled with information. As always, taking information with a grain of salt. But the DSM defines mental health disorder as a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or developmental processes underlying mental health functioning. And often this is really very much associated with distress. And so what I really just want to highlight here is individuals are experiencing a mental health disorder different from someone without a mental health disorder or condition or a diagnosed mental health disorder when it significantly impairs their social, occupational, or daily life roles. So thinking about the people that you serve, maybe they were fired from a job, maybe they lost their housing, maybe they were evicted, maybe they no longer have any friendships or family connections because of some of their mental health symptoms. And then on top of that, we see the substance use piece. So this is again defined by the recurrent use of alcohol and or drugs, which causes again that clinically significant impairment, which results in health problems. We mentioned many of the comorbidities that occur: disability, failure to meet major responsibilities at work, school, home. I always think about social determinants of health, so where people live, learn, work, play, age, worship. If any of their responsibilities in those areas are disrupted, we know that this person may be experiencing a substance use disorder, mental health disorder. And some of those symptoms then include, you'll see this box below, so impaired control or loss of control. So this person is using or consuming more than intended, struggling with stopping using. They're also spending a lot of time recovering from the substance. So maybe this person is experiencing withdrawal symptoms. Maybe this person is experiencing a lot of time spent even in purchasing the substance. And I'm going to say substance throughout just to reference both alcohol and or any kind of drug or substance. And then social impairment. So failing to fulfill major obligations, again, at work, school, home. This person might be engaging in risky use. So maybe they're using in unsafe situations. Maybe they're using while operating machinery. They're using while working. They're using substances while any number of things that could be defined as risky or unsafe. And then that pharmacological criteria. So we talk about tolerance and withdrawal. And tolerance is really just needing more to provide that same effect. Someone who's been using substances for years or decades will likely need more 20 years than they did that first time to experience the same effect. And then withdrawal, which comes with some substances. But thinking about the people that you serve, what are some of those symptoms that they experience specifically with the loss of or the inability to fulfill those major responsibilities or obligations? If you have any examples of some of those, let's say, consequences or some of those challenges that someone faces, are you working with someone who may struggle to maintain employment? Are you working with someone who's struggling to maintain housing? Is there substance use getting in the way of having a relationship with a child, a friend, or neighbor? Feel free to let me know what that looks like because each person is unique and different, and this only speaks to diagnostic criteria, but doesn't speak to a person's narrative and their lived experience. Seen someone mentioning, I lost it in the chat. Transfers are so hard, or coordinated entry needs to do better screening individuals. I will say, excuse me, in some locations, especially substance primary locations, individuals are using ASAM criteria, so the American Society of Addiction Medicine criteria, which actually has just been revamped and there's a new edition out. If you're interested in taking a look at that, much of that is criteria to support and identify standards for placement and treatment and identifying diagnoses and whatnot. But otherwise, you have the DSM as well. I'm seeing substance use creates depression due to not being able to see their child. Yes, so there's this back and forth. When someone's experiencing a substance use, now we're experiencing a sense of loneliness or frustration. We're struggling with seeing family and friends. DCYF involvement or CPS involvement, eviction, loss of housing or employment, disconnection from family and friends, becoming isolated. Yeah. Absolutely. And think about, oftentimes we know individuals who are in our supportive housing or agency-owned housing, at least in the state of New Jersey, much of the housing units are actually conveniently located across from a liquor store or around the corner from a vape shop or around the corner from their local bar. So all of those things make it all the more difficult to support someone in their recovery. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Angie mentions removal from services due to behaviors and how harmful that might be in itself. Regret and lack of confidence that they can turn things around. Yes, and we'll talk about that in the part 2 when we're speaking to motivation and strategies to support someone, especially in that stage. The fear that people will not believe they'll ever get well. Yeah, maybe this person has tried so many times and it's so hard to even think about what recovery or sobriety might look like. Substance use that puts the person in a position of being vulnerable and the person gets taken advantage of by other residents. Yeah, social isolation, stigmatized, and we'll talk about stigmatization at the very end of this. But when I think about substance use or maybe more generally, even if you think of behavioral or process addiction, things like gambling, social media, excess use, shopping, sex, sometimes food or other behaviors that fall into some of those process or behavioral addiction, what we really like to ask is it hurting you? And are you still doing it? And if the answer is yes to both, then there may be a likelihood that this person is struggling with a substance use or behavioral or process addiction. So keep that in mind. Oftentimes we know individuals are using for a variety of reasons, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But substances alter this person's brain and the chemistry in their brain and their ability to make logical, sound decisions. So we'll keep all of that in mind. Low self-worth value, yes. And so then when we're looking at, yes, there's a lot of good messages in the chat. Thank you for that. When we're looking at a co-occurring disorder, again, this is what we're speaking to is the coexistence of a mental health and a substance use disorder. And what we see most commonly In supportive housing, people diagnosed with serious mental health conditions, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder. What are some of the most common mental health conditions that you're seeing with a co-occurring substance use disorder in the places that you work? PTSD, 100%. Anxiety, depression, chronic pain. Yes. Also seeing a mention of borderline personality disorder. TBI. Yes. I have too worked with many people with traumatic brain injury, bipolar disorder, opiate use disorder, cocaine use disorder, and how challenging it is to figure out what is what and what is this person's baseline and what's happening for them, and what symptoms or where are these symptoms coming from, how to identify what's happening. So we know that these are individuals with severe mental health needs and require a lot of support to reintegrate back into the community and to live a meaningful and successful life. And we know it's so important to treat or to support individuals with both at the same time, because there is this conflict back and forth, as some of us have mentioned. If you're experiencing a substance use disorder, maybe you're experiencing feelings of depression or anxiety or all the things that come with that. So you kind of have this back and forth push and pull, almost like a kind of like a seesaw, like you don't know what is what at some point. But we know that people with serious mental health conditions and specifically co-occurring disorders die decades earlier than the average person. So it's so important in our roles as supportive housing staff or wherever you are to help individuals in these areas. And I won't go through this, but again, we know that this is very much aligned, or this is how the DSM defines substances and is broken down even further into mild, moderate, or severe substance use disorders. So a person needs to meet criteria to be diagnosed with a substance use disorder. And I'm seeing some other responses in the chat, again, that there's so many layers that happen here. And our role is really to help figure out what's happening for this person and to support this person. But you'll see the criteria listed here. And like I said, I won't get into the details, but all of this is important to identify or at least recognize, especially when working with people, to screen. Someone mentioned screening is so important. Sometimes there's questions that we fail to ask or miss asking, or maybe we're asking a close-ended question, and we'll get into that in part 2, but how you can engage this person to really understand and to hear this person's story, because that's really the work that we do. We're hearing narratives, we're hearing stories, we're supporting people in being able to build trust and to reach a point where they feel like they are living a life that's worth living. This is fun. So I'm going to launch a poll very quickly. Hope it's here. Yes. Okay. So this poll asks, do you work with any individuals who have a history of or currently use substances? I have a feeling most of us do, but I gave you a few options if not. And then if so, what substance use do you see most often? So you'll see alcohol, tobacco products, nicotine vaping, marijuana, prescription drugs. And that's often prescription drug misuse, hallucinogens, cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, other. I'll give us just a moment. Yes, fentanyl is not on that list. And you're right, Joseph, it's basically in everything. Now it's fentanyl mixed with xylazine. So that can be quite scary. Yes, definitely fentanyl with xylazine. It's like you read my mind. And yes, so the second question, it is difficult to choose just one. But thank you for indicating so. I have a feeling that it's more than just one. And it's more, they're probably equally seen as often. So thank you for pointing that out. Give it just another second here. And what I should have done is press all of the above. Maybe it is all of the above. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you all. So you'll see, really moving to question 2. I know many of us are really here for working with people with substance use. So looking at question 2, majority of us actually selected methamphetamine, with alcohol being second, marijuana, other, again, thank you for noting other. We're seeing fentanyl with xylazine, fentanyl with meth, fentanyl in anything, really. Maybe it's alcohol and another substance. Maybe it's a combination of these things. Is this surprising to see looking at these results? No, unfortunately, no. And in New Jersey, again, we're in New Jersey, very different responses that we got. We got predominantly people with alcohol use, predominantly people with nicotine vaping and heroin or opiate use. So very different population that we're serving. I'm going to stop sharing here. Just a moment, if I can close this poll. Right. So thank you for that. And I want to connect that then to national statistics. So you'll see a couple of graphs here, and just as a high level overview, really for more of acknowledgement than anything. But maybe this is very different than what you're seeing in Washington. So the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, sponsored by SAMHSA within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, covers and surveys residents annually. So this is individuals who are residents of household or what they identify as non-institutional group settings, so shelters, boarding homes, college dorms, and so on. But this doesn't include individuals who have no fixed address. So people who are homeless and not in shelters. We're missing a huge demographic of people. And it also doesn't include people who are incarcerated in jails, prisons, people who are in long-term care hospitals, nursing homes. So there's, again, take this with a grain of salt. But what I really want to highlight, what we're seeing, and this is individuals age 12 or older who have identified as using alcohol in the past month, with that being 137 million individuals. And even more specifically, 1 in 5 of these individuals identified as binge drinkers. Binge drinkers meaning 5 or more drinks for males, 4 or more drinks for those who identify as females. And then 1 in 20 of those individuals were said to have heavy alcohol use. So 5 times in the last 30 days of binge drinking behavior. Regardless, again, many of us have selected methamphetamine. It's still a pretty high rate, but again, this is national for individuals aged 12 and up. Zooming out a little further, if you see the chart on the right, So these are individuals with past month substance use by no mental illness or no mental health condition, any or a serious mental health condition. And this is actually with DSM-4 criteria for the presence of a mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder versus serious mental health condition or serious mental illness defined as a mental health condition that interferes with one of those daily life roles. And what you'll see, again, really looking at the, excuse me, the red bars here, because that's likely the population that we're serving, people with a serious mental health condition by far exceeding in illicit drug use, marijuana, binge alcohol, tobacco vaping, even opioid misuse. So these are the people that we're serving. And just want to make note of that. We likely know that this is true. Again, we're not surprised. And Louis or someone under the Louis department, yes, alcohol tends to be higher because it's more socially acceptable. It's easily accessed and anywhere. I mean, everywhere you go, Tasha, thank you, has drinks involved. Charity events even have drinks involved. And again, where we are working with people, again, they likely live across from a liquor store. Is that true for you in Washington? Do housing units or housing facilities or the places that people live, are they often located next to a liquor store or a bar? Yes. Okay. So zooming out a little further, again, what we really want to just know is that individuals with a substance use disorder and a serious mental health condition, the prevalence is so vast and so large. So keep that in mind. We know this to be true, so I will move past this one. The last statistic that I do want to show here, again, is really looking at this right bar. So adults aged 18 or older in, again, 2022 with a mental illness or a serious mental illness were more likely to have substance use disorder, again, than the average person. And then you'll see in this red bar, so this is a severe substance use disorder by those with a serious mental health condition. So again, these numbers are by large exceeding those without a mental health condition. And so you're probably thinking, Crystal, what are you saying? What are you talking about? We know this. I don't like statistics. I don't like bar charts. I don't care. I know all of this to be true. So what? So yes, thank you for sharing some of your feedback on how this looks in the communities that you serve. Now let's talk about how this might impact a person's overall wellness. And first and foremost, let's think about what are some of the reasons people use substances? Trauma. Trauma is like the overarching umbrella here. Self-medication to numb pain, escape, keeps them awake at night, to stay safe on the street. Maybe it keeps them alive. It's at this point, it's survival. And Allie, thank you for mentioning that. For fun. It feels good. I like it. Or they think it is, yes. To quiet hallucinations. Yes, to quiet the voices. When I use substances, I'm able to quiet the voices. I'm able to sleep better. Boredom, avoiding problems. Yes. For mental health, childhood trauma, lack of engagement in positive and supportive community, homelessness, depression, coping. Yes. Grief, stress, peer pressure, maybe the only friends or the only support system that they have use substances. So in order to stay connected with them and hang out with them requires using substances. Self-destruction, no hope. Yes. Generational substance use, that's a good one. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. And Tasha, good point. Social anxiety. People like you better when you're under the influence. You're able to communicate better with people. You're more fun. You're more exciting to be around. When you're not using substances, you're boring, you're dull. You're not able to hold a conversation. And we know that co-occurring disorders impact and touch every aspect of a person's life. Like we mentioned when we spoke about rock bottom and what that looks like, this can impact every area of a person's life. So cognitive abilities, meaning this person might have lower insight into their substance use or mental health condition, or reduced judgment. They might have social and relational issues. So this person might not have any more friends or connections with family, or they might not be able to hold a relationship, or maybe they are the only person that they are able to stay connected with, again, is the people that they use substances with. And thank you, Tasha, for that lived experience that Tasha was told I was too uptight or serious. We know that this also can have medical problems, chronic health conditions, high blood pressure, diabetes. How many of the people that you're serving also have medical problems or a chronic health condition? Maybe this is impacting their occupation. So are they able to maintain a job? Are they able to even go on a job interview? Family dynamics, trauma history, we mentioned all of that. Legal matters, again, if we're working in supportive housing, maybe they're at risk for eviction, losing housing. Maybe they are struggling with having access to educational opportunities, thinking about the surveys or applications that a person completes, or even thinking about licensure. Sometimes they'll ask about if you're someone who's in recovery or actively seeking treatment for a substance use disorder and how that might impact a person. So we know that there's risk factors, and we've mentioned so many. When we think about risk factors, these are the factors that increase the likelihood of beginning substance use, of regular and harmful use, and of other behavioral health problems associated with that use. We know that not everyone who uses substances will develop a substance use disorder. We know much of this has to do with our biology, genetics. It's estimated that about 40 to 60% of individuals' vulnerability to substances is attributable to genetics and environment, and then the impact on development. So it is very much a combination of all of those things: development, environment, social, emotional, genetic factors that affect whether this person increases the likelihood of their use. And each person has a unique combination of risk factors. So everyone's story, again, is different. We know that some people might have early access to substance use, or someone mentioned, I just saw it, Ken, generational substance use. So maybe there's already substances in your home. Thinking about all of those things combined make it more likely for someone to struggle with substance use. So what are some of those risk factors that maybe the people that you serve have described or that you've observed, things that you may have noticed, things that might contribute to the likelihood of a substance use disorder, or perhaps are exacerbating or increasing their substance use? Abuse or neglect during childhood, PTSD, known dealers in their apartment complex, loss of friends. We'll see trauma a lot. Association. We know people, places, and things have an impact on this person's substance use. coping with stress, frustration, environment. Maybe most people in that building are using substances, or even thinking about for someone who's receiving Social Security benefits, maybe they have their monthly check in hand, and that is something that could be triggering to them. And so they may have a difficult time when they have money in their hand. Maybe they're quick. Good point about impulse control, quick to go to their local liquor store, quick to check in with someone that used to use substances. So we know that all of these things are common high-risk situations. We mentioned boredom, difficulty, maybe problem solving. And Tasha said at my old permanent supportive housing site, we had to do payees because spending their SSI almost same day. Yes. What a privilege it is for us to work in a community where we are able to see and notice and be mindful of all these things. Homelessness, loneliness, yes. So jumping into what to look for, whether that's physically, behaviorally, socially, how many people have gone out to someone's apartment or housing complex or worked with someone in the community and they noticed that someone was actively using substances? And if so, what told you that they were? Was it something that you saw? Was it their environment? Did you notice, alcohol left out? Did you notice other paraphernalia in the home? Did you notice the way this person looked? And it could happen all the time. That's a good point. Maybe you were unsure. So whether it's the environment, Brenda says, smelled it, pills out on the table, usually their appearance, change of behavior, empty alcohol bottles in the apartment. And again, I want to highlight what a luxury and a privilege it is for us to be able to go into the homes of the people that we serve to notice some of these things. Some people who work, again, at the outpatient level may not have this privilege. So very, very mindful of us to be aware of. Slow responsiveness, repeated missed appointments. Yes, they're missing all your appointments with you. They're missing maybe basic primary care appointments, medical appointments. Extreme agitation, appearance of their eyes. Yes. Oh, that's fun. Okay. So when we talk about some substance use disorder physical warning signs, some of us have mentioned those things. And Kathleen also just shared nodding off, slurred speech, cognitive changes, pick marks all over the face. So again, not an exhaustive list, but maybe we're noticing bloodshot eyes, pupils larger or smaller, depending on the substance, deterioration of their physical appearance. So maybe this person is no longer tending to their activities of daily living. They're not showering, grooming, sudden weight loss or weight gain. We've mentioned slurred speech, perhaps tremors, impaired coordination, a change in odors on breath, body, or clothing in their home. Maybe it's, again, things that we're seeing on this person or, again, in their environment. We're noticing smells. We're almost like detectives. We're detectives of the helping profession. So we're the supportive kind. We're noticing these things and we're exploring how we can engage with this person, exploring, what we can do to support this person, which again, we'll talk about in part 2 and part 3. Changing their routine, behavior, losing things all the time. Yes, so talking about behavior. So this person is not attending those meetings with you. They're not attending work or school if they're involved in either of those. They're using substances, and again, some of those risky, unsafe, hazardous situations. they're expressing or you're acknowledging perhaps some of these other pieces. So they're reporting a change in appetite or sleep, different changes in mood or hyperactivity, agitation. Maybe this person has a sense of euphoria and it's not something that you usually see. The opposite hand is the lack of motivation, fearfulness, anxiety. Someone mentioned paranoia as well. I'm seeing other examples in the chat as well. Socializing with unknown people in an apartment, legal problems. Yes. Maybe this person's frequently getting into fights. Maybe they're getting into accidents. Maybe this person has a history of DUIs or DWIs. They're involved in illegal activities. Maybe there is kind of this fluctuating shift in mood, irritability. All of those things are so difficult. Not paying rent, absolutely, for months, even though they have the income. So where is this money going? Maybe this person is struggling. You haven't seen them for quite some time, and maybe you last supported them in going to the grocery store 2 months ago, and you're wondering, that's strange. Or you're noticing that they are missing paying for rent, and maybe there's a sign on their door and they're at risk for eviction. So all of these warning signs, again, what a luxury we have, and I'll keep saying that because it really is. I think working in the community is probably the most, maybe I'm biased, impactful, meaningful work that we can do. We rarely get to see this whole person for who they are and their environment. And then the last piece is those social warning signs. So a sudden change in friends, the things that they like to do, maybe they no longer want to engage in some hobbies that they used to enjoy. Maybe your agency used to provide, let's say, community outings. You're noticing this person never goes anymore. Abandoning some of those enjoyable activities, relationship difficulties, isolation we talked about, neglecting those responsibilities, legal problems we mentioned, unexplained need for money, or again, that opposite. They're unable to pay rent, they're unable to pay for food, they're unable to support themselves, and that financial instability. And just want to point out how it can be so challenging to notice what is what. The difference in symptoms, whether it's a mental health condition, whether it's a TBI, whether it's someone actively using substances, whether this is a trauma response, all of these things are so difficult to pinpoint what is coming from what and what symptom is what. So again, at least noticing some of these things and working on feeling comfortable and connecting with peers or supervisors to work on having some of these conversations. Neglect of pets, and that breaks my heart. Yeah. On the flip side, we have those protective factors. So factors that decrease the likelihood of substance use or behavioral health problems or reduce the risk or the impact of those risk factors. So thinking about the people that you serve, what are some of those things? So I often like to think about social support. Maybe, yes, Jody read my mind. Someone who has support, employment, relationship with a friend or family that doesn't use substances, coping skills. Maybe this person's attending recovery meetings or recovery support groups. They have stable housing, engaging in mental health services. Maybe they have you. They've never had someone like you before. Case management support. Yes. So there's, again, so many different ways that you can support a person and actually gaining more protective factors. So whether it's, providing referral or education or linking them to community resources, having non-judgmental friends. Yeah. Friends that might be okay with you not using substances, friends that might be supportive or challenge you if you are experiencing triggers or cravings or urges to use. Maybe this person is building their valued life role, and maybe they have a family member or a child who is, let's say, they're going to have a grandson or a granddaughter, grandchild, and they want to live to be a grandparent. How important it might be to explore some of these things. Therapy, yes. Medication management. So we'll talk briefly just about the 8 dimensions of wellness. Is anyone, or I have to say, are you familiar with the 8 dimensions of wellness? And Seth, good point. People who won't co-sign your BS and call you out on your BS. Love those people. So you're not familiar with the 8 dimensions of wellness. And that's all right. We'll briefly talk about it here. So the 8 dimensions of wellness were created by Peggy Swarbrick, and I had kind of adapted these specifically to support people with co-occurring disorders. But when we look at the 8 dimensions of wellness, and this is more of a modern day version of the wheel, we're supporting people in some of the following areas of wellness. So emotional wellness, occupational, intellectual, environmental, financial, social, physical, and spiritual. And a lot of this looks like what this looks like is exploring what this person's current emotional wellness is, where they would like it to be. Is this an area that they want to work on or find meaningful? So a lot of this is quite helpful in supporting individuals with co-occurring disorders, and I broke down just a few. So thinking about spiritual wellness or finding meaning and purpose in life. Maybe this person finds it important to connect with a higher power. So you're supporting this person in maybe referrals or resources to local AA, NA, Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, ACOA meetings, and I'll share resources at the end, or maybe other community resources, maybe access to a church. This person's been looking to get reconnected with their higher power, however they define that. Maybe this person is looking to build their emotional wellness. So what that means, as we mentioned before, coping skills are important to be able to navigate some of those distressing, intense emotions. This is likely the first time that someone who is in recovery is feeling their feelings for the first time, and how uncomfortable it is to sit with feelings without using a substance to push that feeling away. Occupational, maybe this person wants to work towards avoiding people, environments, and that might look like if a person is, again, it can be a challenge with where they're living, but let's say this person is interested in returning to work at a bar or a vape shop and having a conversation around, exploring how this person can cope ahead, or is this a feasible time or thing to do for this person if this might put this person at risk? Could there be other meaningful employment that they might be able to find, something that does give them satisfaction and joy and purpose, and reduces the risk of engaging in a substance? So many other areas, again, maybe environmental, maybe this person you're supporting them in avoiding places that are triggering to them. Instead of taking, their usual walk home from the grocery store, can they take a little bit of a different walk or a different path or a different street? Again, we mentioned social, so building social support networks, people who are supportive, people who are able to challenge you, people who are not engaging in substance use. Maybe physical wellness is important to this person. Maybe this person is interested in increasing their meaningful movement and productivity. And Seth says, it looks like a guide to having balance in your life. Balance is essential. Yes, exactly. And that really is. So this is a way to support people in increasing their wellness. And for some people, again, physical wellness might not be important or spiritual wellness might not be important. So what can you do with this person to support their overall wellness? Maybe intellectual, and this means participating participating in activities that are interesting to this person. I mentioned earlier, I like a New York Times Wordle, crossword puzzle, things that are stimulating for the brain, offer a distraction to this person, anything to delay the time spent in or the time this person is having a craving. So delay and distract. And then we'll talk a little bit more about more specific strategies, but yes, this is a way to increase wellness, balance, supporting someone. And we will share these resources with you as well. Helping them find their people, and we're getting them involved with like-minded people. Yeah. I think a common theme is that people feel alone in their recovery, and there are so many people who are experiencing similar yet different lived experiences. So how can you connect this person to resources, things in the community where they feel connected and no longer alone? A couple other things that I just want to cover. We know that stigma happens and it's still quite common. So we're talking about stigma as discrimination against a group of people. Specifically, when we think about people with substance use disorder, along with some of those myths that we mentioned, people in the community might believe that the person that you're serving or a person with a mental health or substance use disorder is dangerous. It's their fault. They chose this life. And we know that is not true. So we know that it's so important to work towards non-stigmatizing language, especially when working with individuals with a co-occurring disorder. And so I share this slide because oftentimes, and it sounds like we are quite familiar and aware of language that might be helpful rather than harmful. And I won't actually ask you to share this, but just thinking about those moments where maybe you have heard some stigmatizing language for people with co-occurring disorders. And instead, what we really speak to, and Washington knows more than anyone about person first language. So we talk about seeing the person first, and we talk about thinking about the history of talking about people with disabilities or chronic medical conditions. We know that using terms like abuse, abuser, addict, alcoholic, user can be quite stigmatizing and negatively affect the perceptions or judgments about people with substance use disorders. And it's so important, even when you're working in the field or working with a coworker, that you're avoiding some of this terminology because it could impair or impact the treatment or the support that you provide someone. It could be more helpful to say person with substance use disorder, person in recovery. Of course, if someone identifies as an alcoholic or an addict, using their language can be helpful. But when we're talking to coworkers, we want to be mindful of perhaps our own judgments or biases that we have about substances and substance use disorders. I often also mention, instead of saying clean, and again, this is up to the person's preference if that's the language that they choose to use. But if we're talking about a urine drug screen, maybe perhaps saying negative, or this person's not currently using substances. And instead of saying dirty, especially with, again, a urine drug screen or UDS, saying positive, or this person's UDS is showing that they're currently using substances, and thinking about how all of that does impact, again, the work that we do, the people that we see, the lives that we're affecting and working to support. Because we know recovery is possible. Recovery is a personal journey. Recovery is a process and recovery is not linear. What does recovery mean to you? Tasha says, preach. It could also literally perpetuate their usage or disorder because all you are doing is enforcing it and making it their identity by naming them and defining them by it. Yes. Absolutely. So we are really only making things worse. We're perpetuating their use. We're perpetuating the stigma. And we know that stigma comes, from a structural level, a systemic level, an individual level. So doing our best to reduce some of that from ignorance, you're right. Angela says, recovery is healing. Yes. What else does recovery mean to you? Growth. Recovery does not involve shame. Yes, there's so much shame and discrimination that prevents people from seeking help. Seth says, living, no longer just merely existing. Yes, we often talk about moving from surviving or simply surviving to thriving. Recovery involves seeking hope for a better life, reigniting the you before the challenges. Yes. And we'll talk about that in part 2 and 3. Oftentimes individuals will say, well, I don't know what else to do. This is the only thing that I do. Okay, what did you like to do when you were a kid? What are some things that you've enjoyed in the past? Regaining their passions. Yeah, maybe this person is getting back into their hobbies, those things that give them meaning and purpose. Recovering family, friends, jobs, housing, recovering all the things lost. And that just gave me the chills. Being present in your body without needing to escape the pain by using substances. Acknowledgement, effort. I love the re in recovery. It speaks to them realizing that they have this inside of them. Yes. And we'll talk about next time, and I'm excited to get there already, but thinking about, the moments where individuals do re-engage in substances, we're not shaming, we're not approaching with a judgmental tone. We're being able to support them in an open and honest and comfortable way. And maybe rather than shaming, we're exploring, okay, what can we do differently? How can we change our change plan? How can we cope ahead? What can we do differently? And validating that those things happen. We know that people don't just stop using substances, overnight. Uh, It could be that they have no idea anymore what makes them happy. Yes. Thinking about trauma and substance use, that these are things that change a person. A person's life has literally been altered. So what are things that this person now likes? There's a lot, and I'll talk about it in the coming parts, but DBT or dialectical behavior therapy has like 225 items on this pleasant activities checklist. Find things that bring them joy, realizing substance use doesn't have to define you, recovering their dignity and self-worth. Yes. Making sure I didn't miss anything. Someone struggling with an addiction is not their addiction. Right. Yes. They have to find out who they are. And that's a good point. They might not like the person that they are now, or other people might not like who they are. So working with the grief of that, moving forward, finding new things. Yes. And so SAMHSA defines recovery as this process of change, which individuals improve their health, wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And you'll see all of these different elements here. Recovery really emerges from hope, the belief that recovery is possible and it's real. Recovery is holistic, and it encompasses an individual's whole life. Recovery is supported through peer support, through relationships, through social support. Absolutely. Yes. So there's so many different elements that this person is working from, and you can ask the person that you're working with, what does recovery mean to you? What would it look like? What does this look like for you? And we'll talk about that again in the future. So stay tuned for that. And we know, again, this is from SAMHSA. So SAMHSA defines 4 major dimensions of recovery. So health, so overcoming some of those um, physical health, mental health symptoms, making informed choices. Their home, so improving their ability to have a stable and safe place to live. Community, so reintegrating into the community and engaging in meaningful daily activities, whether that's work, school, family, resources to participate in, support networks that are supportive to them. And then purpose. So again, living a life worth living, finding something that is meaningful, joyful, intentional, purposeful, and again, providing a sense of new identity for this person. My last question, because this will lead into what might be difficult as we get into part 2 and 3 next week and the coming week. What are some of those barriers that make it all the more difficult to support someone with a co-occurring disorder, to support someone in achieving recovery, however that looks to them? What we've heard in the past, maybe you're struggling with a lack of knowledge or resources. Maybe this person is not ready. Yes. Building trust, building a relationship. A lot of this is showing up for someone. I remember meeting with someone and I would sit on their couch Mondays at 5 or 4. It was every Monday. We would watch a TV show together. And that was us building a relationship. We'd have a casual conversation, and continuing to show up for this person meant more than I may have realized. Not ready, reservations, the person not believing that they're worthy of support. And yes, that comes up quite often, like, I'm not deserving of this. I've done so many horrible things in my life. I'm so scared of living with this new reality. Absolutely. So we know that best practices, we talked about integrating both mental health and substance use through this collaborative effort. Sometimes these systems that we work in don't necessarily work from that model, but we talk about integration as a way to reduce the stigma we mentioned, having all the services in one setting, being able to prevent or working on reducing the risks through early intervention. Integration also supports individuals in reducing emergency room utilization or rehospitalization and overall quality of care. But we'll talk about some of these best practices here in part 2. So please do come back for more. We'll talk about motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral techniques or interventions, illness management recovery and supporting individuals with co-occurring disorders, social skills training, relapse prevention strategies, and then dialectical behavior therapy techniques or strategies, which are my personal favorite. But I just want to leave you again with summarizing. We know that co-occurring disorders are prominent in our supportive housing or the places that we serve. And there's so many different factors that contribute to a person's development of a substance use disorder. And there's so many different factors that contribute to a person's protective factors that are able to improve their wellness and recovery, and always being mindful of the language that we use. We know that recovery is very possible. So I wanted to share some resources. You may be familiar with many of these groups. I realize Washington has their own recovery helpline as well, which I've included at the bottom of this list, but there's meetings for Smart Recovery, Women for Sobriety, NA meetings, AA meetings. adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, especially for those who have relational trauma. So feel free to take a look at some of those things. I've listed my references here. If you could, Earl had shared in the chat the evaluation to part 1. So again, this was just really a foundational overview. We're providing you with an understanding before we jump into some of the juicy interventions that you can support individuals with. Again, as I mentioned, we'll talk more about motivational interviewing and strategies to support someone in engagement and matching your interventions to where this person is at as far as their readiness or commitment or willingness. So if you could, feel free to scan this QR code or press the link that Earl had shared in the chat. And then, as I mentioned, the next upcoming webinar will be exactly a week from today. So part 2 will be evidence-based interventions to support individuals with co-occurring disorders. So now that we've got this overview, let's talk about what we can do. How can we help? So that'll be next Tuesday, same time, same place, same link, 9:30 to 11. Thank you so much for being here. If there's ever any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We do hope to see you next Tuesday and the following Tuesday. So we'll spend part of the month of April together. Thank you so much. We're so excited that you are here. We love the shout out for Earl. We'll see you all next time. Again, thank you for being here. And stay tuned for more. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week.